Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Just gonna give it another minute, but I think we have a good amount of people in here now, so we'll get started. My name is Mark Upman. I am a special education attorney.
And good afternoon. I'm Antula Vasiliu, and I'm also a special education attorney. We work together at Gutman Vasiliu LLP, our special education law firm.
And so today, what I want to do is we're going to go through the IEP. It's not going to be a very long presentation. We're going to go through the IEP, and I'm going to point out all the things that we look at as attorneys, because really the IEP is the first thing that we're going to take a look at whenever a potential client comes to us and they say, we think that we aren't getting the services that we're entitled to, or we think that our child isn't making enough progress. The number one thing I want to do is take a look at the IEP. So we're going to go through page by page. I'm going to show you specific things that we look out for, things that many people, attorneys and parents, don't necessarily pay attention to. And hopefully this will help when you're looking at your own IEP for your child, or when you're working to develop an IEP. So with that being said, everyone should be able to see the screen. At the same time, everyone, there is a Q&A button and a chat button. You can ask questions in either one of those. If it's something we can answer during the presentation as we're going through, we'll do that. Otherwise, we'll answer at the end, but rest assured, we will try to answer every single question that we have. In the event that it's a very specific question that has to do with a very specific set of facts, we might not be able to give you all the information that you need because we might need some more information before we answer that question. But we'll talk about all that as we get to it. So first page, here's the IEP. What we have here, so this is a sample IEP that we've put together based on a number of IEPs that we've looked at over the course of the past 2 years. So we have student name here, John Smith. We have the date of birth. We have the local ID. First thing I want to talk about is disability classification. So let me just make sure I can highlight that. All right, disability classification. So one of the things that I hear from parents a lot is that they don't agree with whatever the classification that's on the IEP might be, right? If a student has autism, there's a classification for autism. But if a student has so any number of other things, dyslexia, for example, right? That's not a specific classification. So there's a number of classifications that every student should be able to fall under. For the most part, this should not have a major effect on the services that your child is getting, right? They don't do it based on the classification. They do it based on your child's individual needs. However, what I want to make sure everyone is aware of, one area where it could affect your family or your child is there are certain schools that will only accept students who have certain classifications. For example, there could be an autism specific school, and they're only allowing students to come into that school if they have an autism classification. Doesn't matter if they have an autism diagnosis, the classification itself must say autism. So if you have something like multiple disabilities, because maybe that student also suffers from dyslexia, right? That could potentially preclude the student from going in. So it's something to be aware of when you are looking at schools if that comes up. Classification could be important. All right. We have projected date of the IEP to be implemented. In this case, we have the hypothetical date, March 20th, 2022, and the projected date of annual review, March 15th, 2023, right? Roughly a year later. IEP meetings should be held once every year. Something to note, there is no place here as to what the date of the IEP actually is, right? We're going to find that way later on the last page or the second to last page, but we're not seeing it anywhere up front. So that's something you have to be aware of, that when you're talking about when did the IEP happen, that's one of the first things I ask parents when it was the last IEP meeting. It's not something you see right away from looking at the first page. When we get to that, I'll flag that. All right, now into the meat of the IEP. Here, when I'm looking at evaluation results, I'm not really taking into account the specific numbers here, right? These numbers don't really mean anything to me because it matters whether the student is making progress in light of that student's individual capabilities. But I am going to note, this is the most important thing that I look at. I look at what evaluations took place, okay? Districts are required to evaluate at least once every 3 years, and they're required to evaluate in all areas of suspected disability. So what this is telling me right here is, okay, well, they suspect the student might need AT, assistive technology, might need speech language, might need physical therapy, right? We don't see any occupational therapy evaluation. We don't see a functional behavior assessment here if the student had behavioral needs. So I'm noting right away things that I'm not really seeing. Also something to note, right, when you're looking at your IEP, I see a psychological evaluation from 7 years ago, 2015. Why did they never do a new one, right? Like I said, they have to do a complete evaluation in all areas once every 3 years. So that's something that I'm flagging right away. I'm thinking, okay, it seems like this district maybe didn't evaluate this kid properly. All right. Then, oh, these annotations disappear if I scroll down. All right, that's fine. So then we get to academic achievement, right? And here's the example paragraph, and we'll point out what jumps out to us. John is a model student. While he does need hand-over-hand support, when he does receive it, he does great. With assistance, he can add or subtract double-digit numbers. He enjoys socializing in a small reading group. He often gets distracted when not receiving direct attention. And he struggles with letter formation, line spacing, and orientation. Okay, I'm sure if any of you have children with IEPs, you've seen paragraphs that are kind of like this, right? So right away, what jumps out to me? He's a model student, right? What does that mean? Are they trying to say that he's doing really great so they can, stop you before you're saying he's not making enough progress? Maybe. While he does need hand-over-hand support, when he does receive it, he does great. Okay, why is it only when he does receive it? Why is he not having that support throughout the school day? That's a concern. If he's only doing great with it, sounds like something he needs. With assistance, he can add or subtract double-digit numbers. What does that mean? What's with assistance? Does that mean someone is saying you can do it? Does that mean someone is circling the potential answers? Does that mean someone is pushing his fingers into the calculator, right? I have no idea of what that means. Can this student really add or subtract double-digit numbers? He enjoys socializing in a small reading group. Okay, flags out to me right away. Maybe this student needs a smaller class size. He often gets distracted and not receiving direct attention. Same thing, right? Smaller class size, maybe a para. And then just general struggles with letter formation, line spacing, orientation. All right. Scroll down. So we're still at the academic section here, right? We'll scroll up a little bit. So we're still in the academic achievement section. He's progressing steadily in reading year after year. Okay, that's something that I would flag and I'd look for proof a little bit later. As long as positive reinforcements are in place to prevent frustration. Frustration, is there a behavior intervention plan in place? John can attend to reading tests for a few minutes at a time. John seems to enjoy using technology. When given an iPad, he's able to scroll through photos, pause and rewind videos, zoom and pan around the screen. Sounds like a kid who does really great with technology, right? So they mentioned an assistive technology evaluation before. I want to make sure that's going to be put into place later. And then the last thing for academic achievement, parent agrees with the recommended program, but would like to see John communicate more, maybe with sign language. All right, this is the district saying the parent agrees. So I'm not necessarily taking it, as if it's a fact. But note how they're saying they like to see John communicate more, maybe with sign language. So now I'm wondering, what did they do as a result of this? Did they increase speech language therapy, right? Did they place the student in a different speech language therapy program? Did they create a goal that's related to this, right? I want to know what they exactly did. And if they didn't do anything, well, that kind of denied the parent meaningful participation, right? The parent expressed a concern, they ignored it. All right, social development. And Thula?
Okay, so social development is the next section in the present levels of performance. So this section talks about specifically when it comes to social development, how does a child interact with other students? What issues are we seeing maybe in their emotional development? So, like Mark said, this is a sample IEP. So, we don't really have too much language here. In a typical IEP for your child, we would hope that there's a lot more of a description. But just to give a sense here of what you might see, this says John is very sensitive to changes in the environment. He also gets overwhelmed when he has to move from a small group or one-to-one into the regular class size. So when you're reading this and you're thinking about social development, whether your child is in a small setting, in a large setting, are they allowing your child to have social interactions with different group sizes of students and with adults? They should not only be noting your child's social development with their peers, but also how is their social interaction with adults and staff as well. So it says when playing games for rewards, he will often get very jealous. Now, you might see different characterizations here about a child's personality. And sometimes, it is a matter of personality, but when you see words like this, you should think about it, like, what do they really mean when they say jealous? And how does your child portray that jealousy? Because sometimes it might be some kind of behavioral issue that should be addressed with some kind of intervention and support, but they're just writing it off as like, oh, he's just a silly kid, or whatever the case may be. So we have to be a little bit more detailed in having those discussions about those kinds of characteristics. It also says that being jealous has started to interfere with his ability to participate in class games. So there's a specific kind of assessment called a functional behavior assessment, and it must be conducted by a school district when a student has behaviors that interfere with their learning or the learning of others. So here, this language that these jealous characteristics have started to interfere with their ability to participate in class, that should raise a flag to you to say, okay, do we need to have a functional behavior assessment conducted for this student? And what a functional behavior assessment will do, it's supposed to be a pretty lengthy assessment where they look at your child over a certain, usually, hopefully a few days and in different environments to see, let's say this jealousy results in some tantrums. How often are they tantruming? How long are those tantrums lasting? And what does it cause them to struggle with in their learning? So that needs to all be measured. And with that data that we measured, then we develop, hopefully, if necessary, a behavior intervention plan. So when you see this kind of language that there might be some kind of behavioral issues, even if it's very small, you should be having the discussion with your school district about whether there should be some kind of behavior assessment conducted to actually see, are they just writing off these behaviors and they think it might not be that frequent, but maybe it actually is having an impact on their learning. So then it goes on to say that when the student is angry or refuses to participate, he's taken outside of the class for one-to-one attention by a favored teacher, and then he's able to return back to class and try again. So this language is a little bit problematic because it shows that they might be inappropriately responding to the child's difficulties in class. So it seems like, sometimes the kid refuses to participate, and what they seem to be doing in response is they take him out of that environment, give him one-to-one attention with a staff he really likes, and then they kind of ease him back in. But if you don't have a functional behavior assessment done, the teachers won't know exactly what the function of that behavior is. So maybe the child is refusing to participate because they realize that when they don't participate, they get pulled out and get to spend that time with that favorite teacher. So that response of the staff of pulling the kid out and giving them that one-to-one attention may be the wrong way to address that behavior. So that's why the assessments are very important. And that's why it's really important to not just see what the social development issues are, but also what the school is doing to address them. Now, you'll also note in the section here, it says that under parent concern, there are no concerns. Now, that's something to think about. Why does it say no concerns there? Is it because the parent actually has no concerns? Or is it because they didn't ask you what your concerns are? Sometimes they might be breezing through these sections and they don't really give the parent an opportunity to comment on each section. So when they go through the academic skills, they should be asking you, okay, parent, what are your concerns with the academics? Then when you move on to social development, parent, what are your concerns with social development? And then on and on for the next sections. The fact that there's nothing written here, the parent should definitely review the IEP once you receive it and look at the parent concern sections, here and here and here, and see what's written there. Because maybe you did raise a concern for each of these sections that didn't get noted in the IEP. And that's a problem also, because the IEP team could kind of be ignoring kind of what you're contributing during the meeting, and it doesn't end up in the IEP. And then if you happen to go to a hearing or you have some kind of dispute with the school down the road, they'll say, oh, you didn't mention any concern. So you want to make sure that when you do raise a concern, you tell the IEP team, can you please make sure you write that in the parent concern section on the IEP? And then if they don't still, I would write them a letter and say, during the IEP meeting on this date, I raised this concern and I don't see it written on the IEP. So I just want to put this in writing to you. So then you still create some kind of written record of what your concerns are. So then if they continue to ignore your concerns, you have that paper trail that you did mention it to the school district and they were the ones that were ignoring you. And then physical development. This has to deal with gross motor and fine motor skills of a student. Sometimes they might focus on one and not the other. So occupational therapy and physical therapy needs should be noted in this section. A lot of the times when it comes to physical development, the IEP team might just breeze through this very quickly and say, all right, is the kid healthy? Do they have any allergies? Are they taking any medications? And if they're a generally healthy kid physically, they might say, nothing of concern here. And also something like if you see here, it says, the student's strengths are that he participates in physical education with his peers. Now, he may participate in physical education, but is he able to do all of the activities in phys ed with all the other students? And apart from that, sometimes like walking or running or jumping, all of these activities are things that should be discussed as part of a child's physical development. And sometimes a school district might just look at, yeah, they navigate around the school fine, they participate in phys ed fine, but are there actually things that make it difficult for the kids to actually achieve those things? So maybe they walk around the school building, but maybe they're walking on their tiptoes, and that's not, the correct walking pattern. So you should go into a little bit more detail about whether there's any physical restraint that your child is dealing with that should and could be addressed with some kind of physical therapy. Then the next section here is the management needs section. This kind of talks about some kind of interventions and things that happen in the environment to help a student pay attention and participate if necessary. So here for John, it says he benefits from repetition and prompting, and he needs preferential seating. So if there's something that's modified in the classroom for your child, maybe there's some kind of visual supports that they need, or maybe they need instructions broken down in different ways, that should be noted in the management needs section. And you should occasionally look at the management needs section and see what they claim that they would be providing for your child. And then when you have parent-teacher conferences or speak with students or speak with the staff, you should make sure that those management needs are actually being implemented. Because a lot of the times, these are just like template terms that they like to throw in there without actually thinking about implementing them in the day-to-day in the classroom. All right, Mark, you want to go over to the next page?
Yeah, and then one other thing just to mention, right? Physical development, remember they had a physical therapy evaluation, right? And we're not seeing any results of that evaluation in the physical development. So that's another thing. You want to make sure that even if they do hand you the evaluation, you want to make sure the evaluation is listed in those IEPs.
Right, and discuss with you. They might have an evaluation done and just, hand the copy to you or say, yeah, the physical therapist might say, yeah, we did this assessment, but they should be reviewing the actual results with you and the recommendations of that evaluation as well.
Right. So now the next section, right, that relates kind of what we were talking about before. It says, does the student need strategies, including positive behavioral interventions, supports, and other strategies to address behaviors that impede the student's learning or that of others? They check marked yes, right? Does the student need a behavior intervention plan? No. How do they know, right? They just said that the student needs strategies. There was no functional behavior assessment conducted, but they're saying the student does not need a behavior intervention plan. Another thing to note, right, these IEPs, they're built on templates of templates of templates, and they're not really formatted well. I mean, an IEP in general is not the easiest document to read. So you can see here, if we, over here, it's yes, no. Over here, it's no, yes. Then we're back to yes, no, right? You got to make sure you're paying attention and that the school is paying attention, that they're putting check marks on the right spots here. Here we have, does the student need a particular device or service to address his or her communication needs? And it is marked as no here, right? And then it says, does the student need an assistive technology device and or service? And it's marked as yes. So now, while what's important here is some people think that's a contradiction, right? Not necessarily. There are assistive technology devices that could be used for things aside from communication, right? Like, for example, students who have difficulty reading documents, right? There's a pen that you can scan a sentence and it will read the document out loud. So here it indicates the student does need assistive technology. It's not for communication. And then I guess we're going to see later as we scroll down what assistive technology device, if any, they actually put in. Also, last thing on this section, they said, does the committee recommend the device be used in the student's home? No. Why is that? Why is there a device that the student needs in school, but he doesn't need it at home, doesn't need it for homework, doesn't need it for remote learning, right? So that's another thing that right away flags out to me, and I'm already starting to think, all right, there are areas here the district hasn't done what they're supposed to do.
Now, before we move on to the next section, which is about students who are, it's filled out usually for students who are 15 and older. I see we got a question about students who are very young, and it says, is this information good to use for the Turning 5 meeting? I'm asking because of the academic part. My little one is not really saying ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. So, but is that really expected at this point of his school age? So for students who are younger, this is still the template that they use. And even though in the academic section, when you think about academics, you think about, actually reading and writing and doing full math of some sort. For younger kids, what should be listed in that section is pre-academic skills. So, maybe they're not saying their ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, but are they speaking? Are they communicating effectively? Do they, when it comes to writing, obviously they may not be writing letters and numbers yet, but are they holding the pencil appropriately? Are they, writing lines on paper? Do they have some kind of letter formation? So there are pre-academic skills that can be noted there. Like maybe the kid is not reading, but do they understand how to hold a book right side up and the concept of turning pages? So, the academic skills that are appropriate for that age level should be discussed and should be noted in that section. So now going on to the measurable post-secondary goals, this section here, and this whole box basically, is about students who are 15 years and older. It should be filled out, but it could be filled out for students as young as 12 usually. So this box is supposed to be providing goals and identifying, or it's basically thinking about what is going to happen to the student after they graduate. After they graduate high school, are they going to go on to college? Are they going to go on to some kind of trade school? Are they going to just go straight into some kind of employment? Do we want to get them to develop some kind of independent living skills so they can start living on their own, or to some kind of assisted living facility? So, the goal is to start thinking about these things as early as possible so that when they actually do get to the point where they're close to graduating, it's not a last minute thing to develop those skills to make sure they're ready to move on to the next step. So a lot of the times you might see very general language here, like for education, it might say, the student wants to go to college. Or for employment, it might say, the student's looking to get gainful employment once they graduate. They typically just try to put very general language there, but you should push the IEP team to get a little bit more specific than that. And there's a section later on where it talks about the specific services and supports that the school should be providing the student. And so we'll talk about that when we get there. But just make sure that if you do have a child who is 15 and older, but sometimes even a little bit younger, like a preteen, you want to look at this box to make sure it's filled out and discuss with you at the IEP team. Sometimes they just write in template language here and they don't actually discuss it with you.
All right. And before we get to the next section, I just want to address another question that just came up. What pre-academic skills can parents work on to help guide their current services and early intervention? One thing you'll hear us say all the time is that we are not, the experts in childhood development, right? We're not the experts in recommending services, things like that. What we rely on are the evaluators and the providers and their recommendations. Oftentimes not DOE evaluators and providers because you don't necessarily trust them. But early intervention, I have heard very good things about a lot of the early intervention programs. So what I would recommend doing there is making sure you're in touch with those providers and you're checking, right? Because one student might really need to work on occupational therapy skills at home, whereas another student, really needs to work on speech language, right? Things like that. So I wouldn't have a strong answer for what specific skills they can work on, but I'd speak to your early intervention providers and see, what areas you can help out with at home.
And they can conduct evaluations for you if needed. So if you feel like you don't really have that much guidance and you don't know where the services are going or what skills they should be working on, they should be able to conduct at least a progress report, if not a full evaluation, to kind of see where they are and what's missing and where the services should be, what skills the services should be targeting.
Yeah. So with measurable annual goals, right? We didn't list all of them here because they are so specific to each individual student. So we can't really give an example of, oh, this seems like a great goal. This doesn't. I mean, generally you can, but we didn't want to spend too much time on this because we wanted to focus on other parts of the IEP. What you're looking at with your IEP is, does the goal make sense to you just generally, right? And are you seeing, if this is a student who's had multiple IEPs, are the goals progressing, right? If you're seeing the same goal on 2 IEPs in a row, that's a red flag right away. Why didn't that goal, progress? And you just want to make sure, like I said, they're required to use they're supposed to pretend that they're using scientific terms. So they'll say things like, out of 3 out of 4 trials, it'll be successful 75% of the time. Just see if that makes sense, right? The classic example my prior employer used to always give is, he saw a goal one time that said the student will successfully look both ways or will look both ways and successfully cross the street. And it's being measured in a way that success would be if he does it 50% of the time. So what's happening the other 50? The student is not successfully crossing the street, right? So, just make sure the goal makes sense to you, that it seems like, okay, if this is a success, then I'm going to be happy with where my child is at. All right, so we're going to breeze past the goals. Although we'll stop for a little bit until we'll talk a little about the measurable annual goals here, right?
Yeah, so for students who are alternately assessed, which means that students, for students who are not able, based on their disability and their classification, to participate in the New York State, standard assessments, their goal sections should look like this. It's a little bit different because not only do these students get annual goals, they should be getting short-term goals. So each annual goal would be listed in these, boxes, and then underneath, there's this section where the short-term goals should be written. Now, a lot of the times IEP teams develop short-term goals in the wrong way. The point of short-term goals is to see, usually quarterly, 4 times throughout the school year, if the student is making progress towards the annual goal. So an example of a correct way to do this would be, let's say the annual goal is by the end of the school year, the student will be able to pay attention without any kind of prompting for 15 minutes straight, right? Let's say it's a student with ADHD and they have a really hard time focusing for even 2 minutes. And so by the end of the year, they want to raise that to 15 minutes. This is like a completely random number. So the annual goal would be for the student to pay attention for 15 minutes without prompting. The short-term goals for that kind of goal would be, by December, the student will pay attention for 5 minutes. By February, the student will pay attention for 10 minutes. And then by June, the student will pay attention for 15 minutes. So the short-term goals are supposed to be benchmarks throughout the school year to help make sure they're on track to reach the annual goal. Because remember, this is for alternately assessed students who are not taking the typical standardized assessments. So this kind of takes the place of that, these quarterly, instructional objectives, short-term objectives. Now, what IEP teams do that's wrong sometimes instead is they might have an annual goal that says, by the end of the school year, the kid is going to pay attention for 15 minutes without prompting. And then for the sub goals, they might have things that are related to attention, but are entirely different goals themselves. So they might have a goal that says that, the student will be able to complete a writing assignment without prompting, and without getting distracted or something. Or they might say that a student will be able to engage in a conversation for 5 exchanges without getting distracted. Those are completely different goals in themselves, and they should be listed as separate annual goals, not short-term objectives. So they might use the short-term objectives as sub-goals, but that's not what those sections should be. So every annual goal should be a goal of its own, and then the short-term objectives are quarterly goals within that annual goal.
All right. So now here is the actual recommended programs and services that everyone's going to have on their IEP. So some things to note here. Pretty standard up front here, integrated co-teaching, otherwise known as an ICT classroom for various subjects. Right away, as I get to this, in this sample IEP, what jumps out to me is there was all that language about this student needing one-to-one attention, right? Or working best in a small group. So I'm right away thinking that an ICT classroom is most likely not going to be an appropriate placement for this kid. But that's kind of all I'm seeing there. Also notice that there's projected beginning service dates. So this is going to be starting March 20th, 2022. The way we built this IEP, it's like this meeting was happening in the middle of the school year. So the student was already in an ICT. They're going to continue when the IEP gets fully published. Now, related services. We have counseling, group of 3 right away, flagged out to me, right? Because why is the student in a big group if they work so much better individually? Also, counseling in general is a tough thing to do in a group setting. Speech language therapy individual, speech language therapy group of 5, again, bigger group, occupational therapy individual. One thing to note here, group doesn't always mean it's worse than individual, right? Sometimes the student really needs to benefit from the social skills they get in a group. But if I'm seeing that a student's main issues are their own speech language therapy, right? And they're having difficulties with that, it's going to raise a red flag to me if they don't have more individual sessions. Now, something also that's important here. So I mentioned the projected service start dates. For counseling, it starts September 3rd, whereas for everything else, it's in March, right? So you got to make sure you're paying attention to that. So why is there a gap? If there's an explanation for the gap, fine, but the explanation can't be the school doesn't have a counselor, right? That's never an excuse. It doesn't matter what the school can or can't provide. All that matters is what the student does or doesn't need. So that right away is something that would draw attention to me. And by the way, all of these examples we're giving are examples from cases that we have actually litigated. So we have seen this, that they, for some reason, add a service that will only take effect 6 months down the line. So make sure you're aware of that. Assistive technology devices, there's nothing here. So they made mention of the fact that the student needs an AT device, but they haven't put anything in there. What that probably means is that they just give the student a device that's in the classroom, right? Like an iPad or something. That's not an AT device. An AT device needs to be individualized to a student. So right away, another red flag here. There's no clear AT provided. All right, 12-month service or programs. If you have a student who goes to school during the summer as well, it'll be listed here. In this case, it says, yes, student will receive the same special education program and services as recommended above. Sometimes we see that, no, they receive different services. In one case I had, right, they went from all individual sessions to all group sessions. Why do they do that? Because the kid benefits in a group? No, it's because they have less staff in school. And again, that's not an allowable reason. They have to show that the kid during the summer, for whatever reason, does not need individual services, and group services are what they're recommending for this kid to make meaningful progress. All right, we got testing accommodations, nothing here, right? But just keep an eye on this as you're going through. This is just where they would put any testing accommodations, double time, use of a calculator, things like that. Transition, you want to jump on this one, Antola?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, in the section above where that needs to be filled out for students 15 or older to prepare for post-secondary life for that transition, this is the section where it should list the specific activities and supports and services that the school is going to be providing to help them reach those post-secondary goals. So a lot of the times what we see here is that there's very little thought put into this section. For instruction, it might say something like the student is going to attend class and complete, their classwork. And then for related services, it might say, the student is going to consistently attend their speech and OT sessions. That's not what this is supposed to say. It's supposed to say what specifically in speech, for example, what specifically are they working on in speech therapy that will help them for post-secondary life. So for example, for a kid who in post-secondary life, after they graduate from high school, they may be working towards applying to jobs right away. Like let's say they're not planning on going to some kind of higher education. Speech therapy services should be helping them with perhaps interview skills if they're preparing to go on job interviews. For occupational therapy, depending on the kind of job that they might be looking at, maybe typing is something that needs to be worked on a little bit more, as they're getting older, to make sure that they have certain skills for certain kinds of jobs. And, these goals and these services and activities for transition planning, they shouldn't just be pulled out of thin air, or just, you shouldn't just guess what you think the kid needs to be ready after they graduate. There's something called a vocational assessment that needs to be completed by the school district that asks these questions specifically about, what are the kids' interests? What kind of jobs do they see themselves having when they graduate? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And based off of those things, you fill out this section. And keep in mind that this is an IEP for a student with a disability. So, every kid in the public school system and in school in general, gets some kind of support to help them for graduation and for what happens next. But kids with IEPs need something more. So it shouldn't just say, a counselor is going to help them with applying to college. Every kid gets help from should get help from a counselor to apply to college. But what specifically related to this kid's disability are they getting on top of that to make sure that they're, put in a position where they'll be successful after they graduate? And then the next section underneath that is participation in state and district-wide assessments. So this is the section that tells you if the kid is going to participate in state tests or if they're going to be alternately assessed. So here for this student, this is a student who's going to be alternately assessed, and it specifies the kind of tests that they're going to use instead. the Student Annual Needs Determination Inventory, also known as SANDI. That's a popular assessment used by the DOE for kids who don't take state tests. And if you see that that second box is checked off, that the student will participate in alternate assessments, then going back to the goals further up, they need to have the short-term annual goals filled out. They shouldn't just have the annual goals, they need to have those short-term objectives.
All right, I see a question. Should a vocational assessment be done for all kids with an IEP? I have a 12th grader about to graduate and it states one is not needed at this time. Anthony, want to take this one?
Yeah, so I can't see how it would be appropriate to never do a vocational assessment. They must have done one at some point. If they've never done one, then I would definitely bring that up with the school district, because how can they say that they know what the kids' vocational needs are without doing that kind of assessment?
Right. I'm trying to think if if it's specifically written out somewhere that a vocational assessment needs to be done, but I know for a fact that they need to consider post-secondary transition. So that kind of starts with at least the level 1 vocational assessment. So I would definitely reach out about having one done and see what their response would be if they refuse to do so or something like that.
Yeah, and especially if you go into the IEP and you see those sections about transition activities and the transition goals, if it's really not filled out very well and there's not a lot of thought put into those sections, then I can't see how they can be justified in saying that they don't need a vocational assessment.
Right. All right, then the next section, special transportation, right? Sometimes students need special transportation to and from school. In this case, the specialized transportation is that it's transportation from the closest safe curb location to school. Also, it's door to door, right? So he's not being picked up on a corner, down the block. He's being picked up right from outside the house. Other things that can come up would be things like limited travel time, right? Like the student cannot be on a bus for more than 60 minutes. It could be things like air conditioner, although I would hope that every school bus at this point has an air conditioner, but we've seen like air conditioned bus, as one of the requirements. So you want to make sure that if there is some issue that's in the IEP. If let's say you have a student who goes to maybe a specialized, or like what's known as a non-public school, they're kind of like private schools, but they contract with the DOE, and they go to a non-public school, and it's a great school, everything is perfect, right? But he's on the bus for 2 hours. And your doctor says, no, this student shouldn't be on the bus for 2 hours. It's damaging. He can't, he's not able to, he has sensory issues, things like that. You can request that the doctor writes a note that says there's a limited travel time. Now, what's going to happen? Are they going to kick the kid out of the school? No, they're going to get private transportation, right? They're going to change the bus route. They'll get a shorter bus with less students that are able to bring the kid to school faster. So he's not sitting and picking up 30 kids and getting all the way to the school. So that's definitely also something you want to keep in mind. If travel time seems like that's a long thing, or if it just doesn't seem safe, maybe he needs a paraprofessional on the bus, something like that. That's what you want to keep in mind as far as transportation. Now, summary, this area at the end, this is one of the most important areas, and people tend to skip past it because it seems like just a summary, but there is new information that is not anywhere else on the IEP, as ridiculous as that is. So first, you have the date of the meeting. For the first time, you have where when the meeting actually took place. You have whether it's an IEP amendment or a reconvene of the IEP meeting. So that's, again, important information. Is this IEP a complete brand new IEP, or is this a revision on a prior IEP, right? You need to make sure you know that. As an attorney, that's something that I need to know when I'm looking at the records. And then this, for me, in a lot of cases, is one of the most important things for me to determine, is a student making progress? Is the IEP created to allow that student to make progress? We have, let me highlight, we have reading levels and math levels, okay? So the student is on a kindergarten reading level and a 6th grade math level. So right away, that's already a big discrepancy. So that kind of raises, a question in my mind. But then I go all the way back up over here, and we have reading from 2020 at a kindergarten level, and the iReady math at a 5th grade level from 2020. So, okay, fair. He seems like he's making progress in math, right? 5th grade over here, 6th grade over there. But reading, it was already on a kindergarten level 2 years ago. So why is it still on a kindergarten level right now? Right away, that's going to be a red flag. Also, I always go here when I have a student who maybe has, 7 IEPs, right? He's if it's an older student, and I'm going to look year to year. what kind of progress has been made, or even worse, I see regression a lot too. I'll see a student on a 5th grade math level, and the next year all of a sudden they're on a 3rd grade math level. But is that explained anywhere else in the IEP? No. So right away, that's something. Just as an example, because we had grabbed one of the IEPs we have in our file, and then we edited all the text. In this IEP that we grabbed, this was actually blank. There was nothing here. That's come up before. That's a concern, right? They're leaving out a crucial part of the IEP. What are the students' actual functional levels at? Then we have the summary of recommendations. This, again, you want to make sure it coincides with what you saw above. In this case, I think it doesn't. We didn't edit all the summary stuff, but for the most part, it does. But you want to go through and make sure that it coincides. Here, does Matthew have a behavior intervention plan? They mentioned that before, but again, the answer is no. But also note the name Matthew, right? This is probably one of the most common errors I see. They have the wrong name so often on IEPs, because what do? They grabbed a prior template and then they worked off of that. Hopefully that's what they did. Hopefully they didn't, create an IEP for the wrong kid. But something you want to note, and you want to ask them that they fix that. So they have the wrong name here. Student needs specialized transportation. It says that already. And then we have promotion criteria, and here parent concerns again, right? And this is kind of general concerns that this is the area where they can put kind of their general concerns. Mom is concerned with John's social interaction with his peers. John is working in communication between him and his peers and initiating conversations and interacting with his peers during activities. A goal was created by a special education teacher to address parent concerns. Okay, well, a goal was created, but what are you doing in order to help him get to that goal, right? Clearly, there is a concern here with his social interactions. Was a social skills class added, right? Was a speech language group class added, right? We saw a speech language group class, but if that's what he's been doing for the past 3 years, then that's clearly, we need something else. So that's another concern. What do they do when you told them this? They just created a goal? Well, so they're just putting down your concern and they're going to see if they meet it, but you already have expressed this concern that you're not seeing the progress here. And then other options considered. So they have to say what other options they consider. They can't just say your kid belongs in an ICT and leave it at that. So in this case, they considered a special class, 12-1-1, and general education. 12-1-1, right, for anyone who might not know, means a classroom with 12 students, 1 teacher, and 1 paraprofessional or like a teaching assistant. So that's actually more restrictive than a regular 12-1, right? Because you have that extra adult in the classroom. So that's another thing that jumps out to me. Why didn't they consider a 12-1? They jumped a level ahead. So you want to make sure that part makes sense. And then their explanation, 12-1-1 is too restrictive, general education, not restrictive enough, right? They're not really giving a lot of detail. Also, they didn't consider any specialized program, right? Did you consider a non-public school like we had spoken about earlier? So that's something that comes out. So as attorneys, right, this is what we're doing when a client comes to us. We're going through this IEP and we're making note of all of this. And we're saying, does it seem like this IEP shows that the student maybe was not making progress? And is this IEP, as it's developed, this IEP as it looks right now, does it look like it was created in a way that it's reasonable, that it would allow this student to make meaningful progress? From this alone, I would feel confident saying, okay, we can take this case. This doesn't seem like this kid's making enough progress. It seems like they haven't addressed his AT concerns. They haven't addressed his behavioral issues. There's no functional behavior assessment. There's no new evaluations, or at least no main evaluation, right? Psychological evaluation was 2015. I want to see another psychological or a psycho ed or a neuropsych. I want to see something like that more recent. I don't know what his occupational therapy needs are, right? We saw some indication maybe there were some sensory issues with transitions. Never had an occupational therapy evaluation. So there's a number of things here that seem to be missing that if I didn't have the background that I do, I wouldn't have noted that from this IEP. Joel, anything to add on top of any of that?
Yeah, if you just scroll back to the last page one more time.
Sure.
I just want to say something about the promotion criteria. This is sometimes a section that's not filled out like it is here, but it is an important part of the IEP because there's 2 options here, standard and modified. Now the promotion criteria tells you for students who are close to grade level, what does a child have to do in order to get promoted to the next grade, to move on to the next grade? If it's standard promotion criteria, then it means that a 4th grade student with this IEP is expected to do the same work and get the same grades as the other kids in the class in order to qualified to move on to the next grade. Obviously they might be getting different kinds of supports as part of the IEP, but the end result, like what they retain, what they understand, their performance needs to be essentially the same as the other students for them to move on. Now, if the criteria is modified, that means that they might be able to do like 90% of what the other kids are doing, or 80% or 75%. And if they accomplish 75% of what the other kids in the class are achieving, then they do get to move on to the next grade. What you want to look out for at the promotion criteria is whether the IEP team is changing it from year to year. So let's say to go from 3rd to 4th grade, they have 75% promotion criteria. And then from 4th to 5th grade, they might lower it to, I've seen like 50% promotion criteria. So if they're expecting your kid to just retain 50% of the information or perform at 50% of what the other kids are performing, is that really the right setting for them? Maybe they need to be considering a smaller class size where they might be able to accomplish a higher level, of the work to move on to the next grade. So you want to track it from year to year to see if the promotion criteria is changing and whether it makes sense for your child.
Yeah, and with that being said, I also want to put out there that both Anthula and I do free record reviews, right? If you're not sure if this is something that is an issue, right? If you think that maybe you have a case but you don't really know, we're happy to take a look, to jump on the phone with you, do a review of your records for free. You can find us on our website, or give us a call at our main number. But something to note: a lot of people are scared about the concept of hiring an attorney, right? Or working with going through the due process complaint process, I guess, right? You need to know that there are over 10,000 cases filed every single year, right? New York City in particular has been failing so many students who have special needs, and they're not providing them with the appropriate services and the appropriate placement. So if you're really not sure, if you want to go through with the process, I'd say at least, find out a little bit more about the process, because, you and your child may really be entitled to a lot more than the DOE seems to imply that you might be entitled to. Hopefully some of the information we provided today will help as you now go back and look at, the last IEP created for your child or for an upcoming IEP meeting. And yeah, if anyone has any other additional questions, you can shoot us an email. This will also eventually get put up on our YouTube channel, so you can comment on the channel, follow us on Instagram, you can post questions over there. And then, if we can answer it in that public forum, we will. Otherwise, we'll let you know to send us an email. We can discuss your case in more detail. Thank you everyone for taking part. And that concludes the presentation. Follow us on YouTube to get a notification of our next presentation that we're going to do. We're going to try and do one of these once a month, and we really want it to be that it's actionable steps that you can really take, right? We're not going to give general flowery overviews of the process, or, general overviews of what's going on with the system. It's going to be specific tips that you can actually put in place immediately. So thank you everyone for joining, and keep an eye on our page for the next one.